10:09 p.m., security cameras show 23-year-old Mara Iqbal leaving the city library in the rain, a blue hardcover book tucked tightly against her chest. She never made it home. Her transit card was never used. Her bank account never moved. Her phone stayed on the network for 11 more minutes, then went silent forever. By the next morning, her apartment looked untouched. Her laptop still open, thesis notes spread across her desk, a bowl in the sink, a seminar outline ready for the next day. Nothing about the scene suggested someone planning to disappear. Police searched for weeks, then months. But with no body, no suspect, and no clear evidence of an abduction, the case slowly lost urgency. Until 6 months later, on a quiet Tuesday night, while clearing an after-hours return cart, a librarian found a blue hardcover that didn't belong in circulation. It had no public barcode, no spine label, and no record in the digital catalog. Inside the front cover was an internal routing slip stamped 10:14 p.m. 5 minutes after cameras supposedly captured Mara leaving the building for good. Paper-clipped to Chapter 12 was an unused bus ticket, dated the night she vanished, and pressed into the page beneath it, visible only after the paper was shaded with pencil, was a line written hard enough to leave an impression through the fibers. "Don't take the bus, take the West Stairs." That single sentence reopened a dead case, because the West Stairs did not appear on any public floor plan, and the room they led to, an old basement archive known by staff as Stack D, had never been mentioned in the original investigation. What police eventually uncovered beneath that library would change Mara Iqbal's case from a quiet missing person file into one of the most disturbing institutional cover-up murders the city had seen in years. This is the story of how a woman vanished in a building full of books, and how the one book nobody was supposed to find finally told investigators where to look. To understand why this case mattered so much, and why so many people initially misunderstood it, you have to understand who Mara was. Mara Iqbal was 23, a graduate student in urban history, and by every account she was disciplined, intelligent, and deeply methodical. She was the kind of person who color-coded research folders, backed up notes in 3 places, and wrote reminder lists on index cards she kept rubber-banded inside her bag. Friends described her as private, not secretive. Focused, not cold. She wasn't flashy. She didn't post much online. She didn't have chaotic routines or a history of disappearing for days. Her life, if anything, was structured almost to a fault. She had been spending that spring at the Wexler City Library, a century-old public research building with marble staircases, high windows, and a reputation for housing rare municipal records most universities didn't have. Mara's thesis focused on transit expansion, displacement, and neighborhood mapping between 1910 and 1940. That meant old route maps, planning reports, funding ledgers, and obscure local journals. Exactly the kind of material stored in library annexes, basement files, and uncatalogued archive overflow. She wasn't there for ambiance. She was there because she needed records other people ignored. And that turned out to be the first important detail. Because weeks before she vanished, Mara had started telling 2 people the same thing, that the library's archived materials didn't match the catalog. At first it sounded academic. Misfilled journals, missing accession cards, handwritten corrections in record books. But Mara wasn't the kind of person who complained vaguely. When she noticed something, she documented it. One classmate later told police Mara had become unusually fixated on a set of interwar transport committee volumes that appeared in the index but could not be physically produced. A second friend said Mara mentioned holes in the chain, by which she meant old materials that had been signed into preservation, then never returned to the visible collection. On its own, none of that sounds criminal. Libraries lose things, archives get messy. Basement rooms flood, paperwork disappears, and old systems overlap badly with digital ones. But Mara didn't think it was random. 3 days before she vanished, she texted a friend after leaving the library. "There's a hidden storage trail here. Either someone is stealing from the archive, or someone is hiding something in it." That message would not seem urgent until much later. At the time, she still showed up every day, still checked in at the front desk, still stayed late, still trusted the building. And like many victims in cases like this, she did not seem afraid until just before the end. The night Mara disappeared was a Thursday near the end of April. It had rained on and off all afternoon, and by evening the streets were shining under bus lights and traffic glare. The library closed to the public at 10 p.m. But research patrons with archive approval were sometimes allowed to remain a few minutes longer if staff were finishing retrievals. Mara had signed in earlier that afternoon and spent most of the evening in the periodicals room reviewing bound journals and comparing shelf references to a handwritten accession ledger. At 9:18 p.m., she sent a voice note to her friend Sana. It was short, calm, but different from her usual tone. She said, "I think I found where the missing routing numbers go. There's a basement designation that doesn't appear on the public map. If this is what I think it is, someone's been moving things off record." Sana later told police she asked if Mara was okay, and Mara laughed it off. She said she just wanted to photograph one more set of notes before the building closed. At 9:46 p.m., Mara exchanged a series of messages with a library preservation contractor named Elliot Crane. That detail would not surface until much later, because investigators initially reviewed only her main message threads and missed deleted texts restored from a cloud backup months afterward. Elliot Crane was 38, worked under a third-party conservation contract, and had access to staff-only archive spaces while restoration work was underway in the basement levels. To most patrons, he was invisible. To staff, he was useful. He handled damaged bindings, intake boxes, humidity protocols, and archive overflow. He also knew the old building better than almost anyone working there. According to later forensic recovery, Elliot texted Mara at 9:46 p.m. "Found the municipal route binders you asked about. Not in main storage. If you want to see them before they go back down by West Service Stairs, elevator is out." Mara replied 2 minutes later. "Now?" He answered, "Need to lock up soon. 5 min." What happened next had always been misunderstood because the main front door camera told an incomplete story. At 10:09 p.m., security footage showed Mara walking out through the main lobby doors holding a blue hardcover. That image became the foundation of the case. Investigators assumed it was her final exit. They built the entire timeline around the idea that she had left the building and disappeared somewhere between the library steps and the street. But the book found 6 months later would prove something critical. Mara had not actually gone home. She had stepped out, likely intending to leave, then changed course. Why step outside first? Investigators later believed she may have gone toward the front doors to check whether the buses were still running in the rain, or simply out of habit after the public closing announcements. Then she likely remembered the message about the archive binders, turned back, and circled around the west side of the building toward the service corridor entrance. That entrance was not monitored by the same camera system, and in the original investigation, nobody thought to check whether a late-night archive contractor had asked her to return. At 10:12 p.m., a low-resolution alley camera from a pharmacy across the block captured a figure matching Mara's height and coat moving along the library's west wall toward the staff delivery ramp. The image was grainy, but she was carrying the same blue book. At 10:14 p.m., the internal routing slip later found inside that book was stamped in the basement intake station, which meant one thing beyond argument. 5 minutes after the world thought Mara had left the library for the last time, she was still inside. When Mara was reported missing the next morning, police did what police often do in a case with limited evidence. They followed the most obvious path first. They checked her apartment. They spoke to friends. They reviewed public-facing CCTV. They looked for evidence of self-harm, voluntary disappearance, financial distress, relationship conflict, addiction, or travel planning. They found none. But what they also didn't find was a clean sign of violent crime. There was no body, no blood, no scream heard by witnesses, no confirmed abduction vehicle, no immediate suspect with a visible connection. And because the front door camera seemed to show her leaving alone, the working theory shifted outward. Maybe she was intercepted on the street. Maybe she got into the wrong car. Maybe something happened at the bus stop. Maybe she chose not to come back. That last assumption never fit Mara's family. Her mother said from day one, "My daughter does not vanish casually." If she left her laptop open and her notes on the desk, she expected to come home. But families say things police cannot always prove. And in missing person investigations, the first 48 hours often decide the shape of the case. Once a narrative hardens, it becomes difficult to undo. The library, for its part, cooperated, but only within the boundaries of what was asked. Administrators provided sign-in sheets, public floor logs, and statements from the evening manager. They confirmed that no alarms had been triggered, and that the basement archive areas were restricted, inactive, and supposedly unrelated to public patron movement. A security technician noted that one interior corridor camera near the West Service Hall had briefly malfunctioned between 10:11 and 10:17 p.m., showing signal interference. That fact went into a report but was not heavily pursued. Old buildings have dead zones. Renovation equipment causes noise. Weak evidence gets filed and forgotten. No one asked for a full contractor access audit. No one cross-checked private staff entrances against patron movement, and no one physically searched the old sub-basement storage lanes beneath preservation overflow. Not thoroughly, not with dogs, not with structural maps, not with any urgency. Why? Because the building itself misled them. Official floor plans available to responding officers showed no active route from public space to the disused archive chamber once known as Stack D. It appeared sealed after flood damage years earlier. Library leadership described it as inaccessible and irrelevant. Investigators accepted that answer. By the end of the first month, the case was treated as suspicious but stalled. By the third month, it was cold. By the sixth, Mara's posters had faded in bus shelters. Her classmates had moved into the next term, and the only people still checking every tip were her family, one close friend, and Detective Lena Hale, the investigator who never fully believed Mara's last movement had happened outside. Hale kept coming back to one problem. If Mara vanished on the street, why did the evidence stop so perfectly? No transit use, no digital footprint, no movement pattern, no witness account that held up. It was as if her trail had ended before it ever truly began. And then the blue book appeared. It was found after closing on a Tuesday by a 29-year-old assistant librarian named Naomi Price. Naomi was clearing a return cart left near the staff sorting room when she noticed a thick blue hardcover sitting on top of a stack of ordinary returns. What made it strange wasn't just the color or the timing. It was the fact that the book didn't belong there. Most library books have obvious identifiers, spine labels, barcodes, RFID stickers, dust jackets, call numbers. This one had none. It looked like a bound municipal volume, older, heavier, the kind of thing usually handled in archives, not circulation. Naomi opened it expecting a donor plate or old classification mark. Instead, she found an internal routing slip pasted inside the cover, stamped in blue ink, basement intake 10:14 p.m. The date was the same night Mara disappeared. That was enough to make Naomi stop. Then she turned to chapter 12 and saw an unused bus ticket paperclipped to the page. The ticket date matched Mara's last night too. It was never validated, not torn, not swiped. Which meant if the ticket belonged to Mara, and later evidence strongly suggested it did, she never boarded the bus she was assumed to be heading toward. Naomi brought the book to her supervisor, who immediately recognized the date and called Detective Hale. What Hale saw next changed everything. The page under the ticket looked blank at first, but Hale had worked older paper cases before, and she recognized the pressure pattern, faint indentations consistent with someone writing on a sheet placed over that page. Using a soft graphite stick, forensic technicians lightly shaded across the paper. Slowly, letters surfaced. Not ink, pressure memory, a sentence written hard enough to bruise the fibers beneath it. Don't take the bus, take the west stairs. Below it, smaller and more hurried. If anything happens, check stack D. That wasn't a cryptic ghost message. That was a warning. And warnings change investigations. Because now police had evidence that Mara had planned to go somewhere inside the building after apparently leaving. She had enough concern to leave herself a note. She named a specific route, the west stairs, and a specific location, stack D. For the first time, investigators had a plausible reason to believe the crime scene had never been the street. It had always been the library, or more precisely, the part of the library almost nobody had bothered to search. Once the case was reopened, Detective Hale pushed for something the first inquiry had failed to do. A structural search of the building using historical blueprints, renovation records, contractor pathways, and archive service maps. That process revealed an uncomfortable truth. Stack D was real. It had existed as a sub-basement overflow archive dating back to the 1970s, originally used for oversized municipal donations, damaged bound volumes awaiting restoration, and duplicate storage. After a major flood years later, library officials publicly described the chamber as sealed and out of use. Technically, that was true for patrons. But internal maintenance records showed the area was still intermittently accessed through a West Service staircase and a freight corridor during preservation projects. In other words, it wasn't abandoned in the dramatic sense. It was hidden in the bureaucratic sense, off the map, off the tour, off the public record. That made it perfect for two things: storing material no one wanted to deal with, and moving through the building unseen. When Hale ordered a full search, the West Service stairwell led down past an inactive humidity chamber, a locked restoration prep room, and finally to a compressed aisle system behind a rolling steel partition. The air was cold and dry. The lighting was partial. Dust patterns suggested intermittent use. Not heavy traffic, but not neglect either. And very quickly, investigators began finding things that should have appeared in the first search. A broken thumbnail with degraded polish caught in a floor seam, a small rust-colored stain on the edge of a metal cartwheel, a snapped hoop earring under shelving tracks. Then in the preservation workroom adjacent to Stack D, crime scene technicians found a desk blotter with pressure impressions preserved on the paper beneath the top sheet. When enhanced, some of the writing matched Mara's hand style from her thesis notes. One line read, "EC moved volume, 12 off list again." Another, "He knows I noticed." EC, those initials pointed toward one person with both access and opportunity, Elliot Crane, the same contractor who had texted Mara that night. The same contractor library management barely mentioned in the original case summary. The same contractor whose name was absent from the first internal interview list, despite working late in the building the night Mara vanished. That omission would later become one of the most criticized failures in the entire investigation. Because once Hale focused on Elliot, the case stopped looking like a mystery of disappearance and started looking like a cover-up hiding in plain sight. Elliot Crane had the kind of biography that helps dangerous people stay unremarkable. He was competent, quiet, technically skilled. He moved through institutional spaces with the confidence of someone who understood systems most people ignored. Contractors like him are rarely the face of a building, but they know its weaknesses better than anyone. Blind corridors, override keys, dead cameras, backlogged inventories, old storage rooms nobody audits properly. Coworkers described him as polite but hard to know. He was not socially central. He did not attract obvious trouble. But once investigators reopened the case and interviewed staff again, this time with sharper questions, patterns. Two female employees said Elliot had a habit of standing too close in archive aisles. One recalled him asking intrusive questions about when she usually left for the night. Another said he seemed unusually interested in which patrons requested uncatalogued materials. A graduate assistant remembered Mara once referring to him as helpful in a way that makes me keep my phone in my hand. That line mattered, because it suggested discomfort before the disappearance, subtle, not yet criminal, but real. More troubling still, forensic accountants working with the reopened case discovered Elliot had been quietly supplementing his income through a rare book intermediary. Over a 2-year period, individual maps, title pages, and plates matching damaged municipal holdings had appeared in private sales channels, after being separated from bound volumes that libraries rarely track page by page. Selling entire stolen archive books is risky. Selling them in pieces is harder to trace. Investigators could not prove every sale came from Wexler's holdings, but they didn't have to. They only had to prove motive, access, deception, and violence in Mara's case. And the digital evidence started aligning fast. Recovered message fragments showed Mara had become suspicious of accession irregularities involving volume transfers signed with Elliot's initials. Building system logs revealed his contractor key fob had accessed the West Service corridor at 9:41 p.m., 10:03 p.m., and 10:16 p.m. the night Mara vanished. That alone would have been damning enough. But then forensic analysts recovered deleted system activity from the interior corridor camera nearest the basement hall. At 10:11 p.m., the feed did not malfunction naturally. It was manually interrupted through a maintenance override panel, a function Elliot was trained to use during equipment calibration. The timing was almost exact. Mara re-entered through the west side. The camera went dark. The basement routing slip was stamped at 10:14. The window of violence had finally narrowed, and when police searched Elliot's apartment under warrant, they found the thing that turned suspicion into a case. In a storage bin beneath wrapped restoration cloths was a phone case matching Mara's model without the phone itself. The interior edge contained trace DNA consistent with her profile. Also recovered were 2 missing accession cards from the same record series she had been researching, and a folded paper with shelving codes leading directly to Stack D. Elliot denied everything. He said Mara had been overdramatic, that she liked archive mysteries, that she might have wandered somewhere she shouldn't have. He admitted texting her but claimed she never came down. He blamed the camera interruption on routine testing. He could explain every suspicious detail separately. What he could not explain was why so many of them converged around the same 7 minutes. And he could not explain what search teams found next. By this point, investigators believed Mara went to Stack D because she thought she had found proof of off-record archive movement. She likely also believed Elliot was about to show her the missing volume trail she had been chasing for weeks. Whether she went down there out of trust, curiosity, or urgency, nobody can say with certainty. But the evidence suggests she knew enough to feel uneasy. That is likely why she left herself the note. The pressure impression in the blue book was not random. Forensic reconstruction suggested Mara had used the book as a hard surface while writing on another sheet. Probably quickly, probably standing, possibly before heading to the west stairs. That meant she had enough awareness in that moment to preserve a breadcrumb. Not a full confession, not a dramatic last message. Just a practical clue. If something happens, check Stack D. It was exactly the kind of thing a careful person would do. The likely sequence, as later presented by prosecutors, went like this. Mara exits the main lobby at 10:09 p.m. with the blue archive volume in hand. She circles toward the west side of the building after Elliot tells her the route binders are downstairs and the elevator is unavailable. She enters through the contractor access corridor. The camera nearest the basement hall is deliberately disabled. She goes down the west stairs carrying the book. At some point in Stack D or the adjacent preservation room, she confronts Elliot about the missing materials. She may have threatened to report him. She may have already photographed inventory discrepancies. Her phone records showed an attempt to open the camera app at 10:13 p.m., though no image was saved. A struggle follows. Evidence recovered from the shelving track and work table indicated impact, scraping, and transfer consistent with forced restraint. Blood traces later matched Mara's DNA in microscopic amounts on the underside of a mobile shelf crank. She may have struck her head during the struggle. But prosecutors argued and the physical evidence supported that the fatal violence did not stop there. This was not a panicked shove followed by immediate emergency action, because Elliot did not call for help. He disabled a camera, he moved evidence, he removed her phone, he hid her belongings, and he concealed her body in a place only someone familiar with the substructure would think to use. Behind the far wall of Stack D was an old flood diversion sump chamber accessible through a maintenance hatch concealed by compact shelving. During the original missing person sweep, no one pulled the shelving track far enough to expose the hatch because the basement was considered inactive and secondary. When cadaver dogs were finally brought into the reopened search, they alerted repeatedly near that wall. Investigators opened the hatch. Inside the dry lower cavity, wrapped in degraded packing cloth and plastic sheeting, were human remains later identified as Mara Iqbal. She had been there the entire time, beneath the library, less than 40 meters from the desk where she had spent her last known evening working. The forensic findings were devastating. Because once Mara's remains were recovered, the case no longer relied only on reconstruction or suspicious behavior. It finally had physical truth. The medical examiner determined that Mara had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, along with signs of manual compression to the neck. Due to decomposition and concealment conditions, not every detail could be resolved with complete precision, but the ruling was homicide. She had not simply fallen. She had not hidden herself. She had not wandered off and died elsewhere. She had been attacked inside the building. Under her fingernails, preserved biological traces were consistent with a partial male profile that could not exclude Elliot. Fiber evidence from the wrappings matched materials from the preservation workroom, where Elliot regularly handled binding cloth, sealing plastic, and restoration tape. More importantly, shelf track residue recovered from the hatch edge contained microscopic transfer from Mara's coat and from work gloves later seized from Elliot's apartment. There was also the matter of her phone. It was never fully recovered, but digital forensics from network records suggested it powered down in the sub-basement area at approximately 10:20 p.m. That aligned with the narrow timeline investigators had been building from the book, the key fob logs, and the disabled camera. Then came the prosecutor's strongest argument of all: behavior after the fact. In the days following Mara's disappearance, Elliot had searched for phrases including paper pressure writing recovery can pencil reveal, writing on next page, how long basement scent remains in sealed room building, camera maintenance logs deleted. Those searches were introduced at trial not as proof by themselves, but as consciousness of guilt, and the Blue Book, the object that reopened everything, became the symbolic center of the case. The volume turned out to be an uncatalogued municipal proceedings binder from the exact record series Mara had been examining. It contained internal reference slips Elliot had apparently used while moving materials between official storage and unlogged preservation space. Investigators believed he intended to remove or destroy the book after the killing, but during a later basement reorganization it was mistakenly mixed into ordinary sorting carts and surfaced where Naomi found it. If that single book had been discarded properly, if that one page had not preserved Mara's pressure note, if one librarian had not noticed a missing barcode, the case might have remained unsolved, not because there was no evidence, but because the evidence was buried inside a system that had already decided it had looked hard enough. Elliot Crane was charged with murder, evidence tampering, abuse of a corpse, obstruction, and theft-related offenses linked to archival materials. He pleaded not guilty. The defense strategy was predictable. They argued the case was circumstantial. They claimed the basement area was accessible to multiple staff and contractors over time. They suggested Mara may have discovered the illicit archive sales network but confronted the wrong person, or that Elliot's suspicious behavior reflected theft, not homicide. They attacked the timeline, the degraded biological material, and the fact that some digital evidence had been recovered only after significant delay. But juries do not decide cases by isolating each fact and pretending the others do not exist. They decide whether the full picture makes sense. And the full picture in Mara's case was brutal. A victim who documented irregularities. A warning note naming the location. A suspect with access, motive, and deleted communication. A manually disabled camera during the exact window she re-entered. Key fob logs placing him at the scene. Hidden remains beneath that same scene. Stolen archive material connected to the records she was tracing. And post-crime searches revealing fear of paper impressions being recovered. There was no innocent explanation broad enough to hold all of it. One of the most powerful moments of the trial came when the prosecution displayed the graphite-developed page from Chapter 12. The jurors could see the words exactly as Mara had pressed them months earlier. Don't take the bus. Take the west stairs. Then beneath it, if anything happens, check stack D. The courtroom was silent. Because in that instant, Mara was not just a victim reduced to evidence. She was present in the case again. Not physically, not magically, but in the most real way that matters in court. She had left instructions. She had done what careful people do when they realize a situation may be turning dangerous. She had tried to make herself findable. After a 9-day trial and less than a full day of deliberation, Elliot Crane was found guilty on all major counts. When sentencing came, Mara's mother gave a statement that would later be quoted in nearly every article about the case. She said, "People kept saying my daughter disappeared. She did not disappear. Someone kept her from coming home." That sentence, more than anything, reframed the whole story. Because this had never been a mysterious vanishing. It was a murder concealed by access, routine, and institutional blind spots. Some true crime cases stay in public memory because they are spectacular. Others stay because they are intimate, because they expose how ordinary a dangerous setting can appear until it is too late. Mara's case stayed with people for that second reason. A library is supposed to feel safe, quiet, structured, civilized. It is a place of order, information, and routine. The horror of this case was not that it happened in a remote alley or an abandoned warehouse. It happened in a place built around trust. That trust existed at every level. Patrons trusted staff spaces were separate and secure. Researchers trusted specialist workers knew the archive better than they did. Police trusted official floor plans and administrative statements. Management trusted that old backrooms marked in EP did not need close attention, and Elliot Crane used every layer of that trust like camouflage. He understood that most people never really see institutional spaces. They move through them with assumptions. They believe labels. They believe doors that say restricted are simply administrative, not dangerous. They believe if something is off record, it is probably just disorganized. Mara did not entirely believe that. That is why she noticed the discrepancies. That is why she followed the missing volumes. That is why she left herself a note. And that is also, tragically, why she became vulnerable to the person who realized she had noticed too much. There is another reason the case lingered. It exposed how close an unsolved file can sit to the truth without reaching it. Mara's body was in the building from the beginning. The suspect's access trail existed from the beginning. The basement camera interruption existed from the beginning. But those facts were scattered across departments, assumptions, and incomplete questions. No single clue failed. The system failed by failing to connect them. The Blue Book did not create the truth. It only forced people to finally read what had been there all along. 6 months after Mara Iqbal vanished, a librarian picked up a book that should never have been on a return cart. Inside it was a bus ticket from the night Mara disappeared, untouched because she never boarded. A basement routing stamp from 10:14 p.m., proving she had still been inside the library after everyone thought she was gone. And a pressure-written warning she had left behind in the fibers of a page, just in case no one listened to her in time. That note led detectives to Stack D. Stack D led them to Elliot Crane. And beneath the shelves of a room most people didn't even know existed, they finally found what had happened to her. Mara was not lost in the rain. She was lured back into the building by a man who believed hidden rooms and weak systems would protect him. For months, he was almost right. But in the end, the smallest surviving thing, the imprint of a sentence on paper, did what surveillance, routine, and bureaucracy failed to do. It brought her home. And if there is one reason this case still unsettles people, it is not because it feels supernatural. It is because it doesn't. It feels possible. A quiet building, a trusted worker, a smart young woman noticing the wrong pattern, a system that looked but not deeply enough, and a final clue waiting in plain sight, inside a book nobody was supposed to open.